He had seen the girl before, of course. She was a ghost in a crisp white shirt and a cheap red vest, a flicker of movement at the edge of his vision. A function, not a person. She refilled water glasses with a downcast gaze, cleared plates with an efficiency that was designed to be invisible. Enzo Bellini was a man who noticed everything, but he had never truly noticed her. Not until tonight. Tonight, his mother, Isabella, was agitated, her hands fluttering with frustration on the starched white tablecloth. The head waiter, a man with an oily smile and a condescending posture, was leaning in too close, speaking too loudly as if volume could penetrate the wall of silence that had surrounded her for 70 years. Enzo's jaw was a knot of granite. He felt the familiar, ugly coil of anger tighten in his gut. He could buy this entire restaurant and fire every last employee for the disrespect they showed his mother, but it would not solve the fundamental problem. The world was not built for her. But then the ghost moved. The little waitress, the one with the tired eyes and the hair pulled back, so tightly it seemed severe, drifted toward their table. His man, Rocco, shifted in his seat at the adjacent table, a subtle warning, but the girl didn't seem to see him. She saw only his mother. She stopped a respectful distance away, her hands clasped in front of her. She took a small, steadying breath, and then she lifted her hands. They moved with a fluid grace that was hypnotic. It was a language Enzo did not speak, but he understood its intent instantly. It was a question, an offering. His mother's frustrated expression melted away, replaced by pure, astonished delight. A light came on in her eyes that Enzo hadn't seen in years. Her own hands, usually still and heavy in her lap when they were in public, rose to answer. They danced in the air between them, a silent, vibrant conversation blooming in the oppressive quiet of the fine dining establishment. For the first time all night, Enzo felt the knot in his chest loosen. He leaned back, his gaze fixed on the girl. She was no longer a ghost. She was a shock of color in a gray world, and he suddenly, desperately, needed to know her name. Clara felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, but for once, she didn't shrink from them. The only eyes that mattered were the kind, wrinkled ones across the table. The elderly woman, Isabella, was signing with the speed and enthusiasm of someone who had been starved of conversation. She asked about the fish, about the wine pairings, about Clara herself. Clara answered with practiced ease, her fingers weaving stories about the chef's specials. She recommended the sea bass with lemon and capers, explaining how the chef prepared it with a delicacy that Isabella would appreciate. She had learned sign language for her little brother, a secret skill she never imagined using outside the cramped walls of their tiny apartment. It was her private language of love, a world she had built for him. To use it here, in this temple of wealth and power, felt both terrifying and profoundly right. She was so focused on Isabella's radiant smile that she barely registered the man sitting opposite her until he spoke. "What is your name?" The voice was low, a gravelly rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. It held an authority that silenced the entire room. Clara's hands froze midair. She forced herself to look at him, truly look at him, for the first time. Enzo Bellini. She knew the name, of course. Everyone in the city knew the name. It was whispered with fear and reverence. His eyes were the color of dark, aged whiskey, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. "Clara," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Clara." The oily manager, Julian, chose that exact moment to scurry over, his face a mask of pinched fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he hissed, his eyes darting from Clara to the silent communication still hanging in the air. "You are a waitress, not a floor show. Get back to your section." Now he reached out to grab her arm, a gesture of casual ownership he'd made 100 times before. But his fingers never made contact. "Touch her," Enzo said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm, "and you will lose that hand." Julian froze, his arms still outstretched. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, terrified white. He looked from Enzo's unblinking stare to the hulking form of Rocco, who was now standing, his suit jacket doing a poor job of concealing the bulk of his shoulders. The threat wasn't loud or theatrical. It was a simple statement of fact, and that made it infinitely more terrifying. Julian snatched his hand back, as if he'd been burned. "My apologies, Mr. Bellini. A misunderstanding." He practically tripped over his own feet as he backed away, melting into the shadows. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its collective breath. Clara stood rooted to the spot, her heart hammering against her ribs. No one had ever defended her before. She was used to being dismissed, to being invisible, to being a tool that Julian could sharpen or discard at will. But in the space of a single sentence, Enzo Bellini had redrawn the lines of her world. He turned his attention back to her, his expression unreadable. "Please," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "Continue. My mother is enjoying herself, and so she did." She finished taking the order, her hands a little unsteady now, acutely aware of the dangerous man watching her every move. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was something he had noticed. She wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of surreal tension. Clara moved through her duties on autopilot, her awareness constantly tethered to the corner table where Enzo Bellini sat. She could feel his eyes on her as she served other patrons, as she cleared tables, as she refilled wine glasses. It wasn't an lecherous gaze. It was something far more unnerving. It was assessing, possessive, as if he were examining a piece of art he had already decided to acquire. When they had finished, and Isabella was smiling, patting her stomach in satisfaction, Rocco discreetly handled the bill. Enzo, however, remained seated. He waited, patient as a predator, until her shift was over and she was gathering her meager belongings from a staff locker. She pushed open the back alley door, the cold night air a welcome shock to her system, and found him waiting for her. He stood cloaked in the shadows, the orange glow of a distant street lamp carving his sharp profile out of the darkness. Rocco was a few feet away, a silent sentinel. "I'm sorry if I caused you any trouble in there," Clara said immediately, clutching the strap of her worn backpack. "I didn't mean to overstep. You caused no trouble," he stated, dismissing her apology as if it were an irrelevance. He took a step closer, and she had to fight the instinct to retreat. "Where did you learn to speak with your hands?" The question was direct, leaving no room for evasion. "My brother," she said softly.
"He was deaf.
I learned for him." She didn't add that he was gone now, that the language was a living memorial to the one person she had loved most in the world. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Sympathy? Understanding? It was gone before she could be sure. "My mother has not been this happy since my father passed," he said. It was a confession, a raw piece of information he would share with very few. "She is lonely. The world is loud, and she is quiet." He paused, his gaze boring into her. "I want to offer you a position. As a companion for her. You will come to the house, spend a few hours with her each day.
Talk to her.
The way you did tonight." The offer was so unexpected it stole her breath. I have college classes. And this job, quit this job," he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "I will pay you triple what you make here. I will pay for your college. Name your price, Clara." It will be met. It was a golden cage, and the door was swinging wide open. Fear warred with the desperate, crushing weight of her poverty. This money could change everything. But working for Enzo Bellini, that meant entering his world. A world of shadows and violence. "I'm just a waitress," she whispered, a desperate plea for him to see her as she was, as someone not equipped for his life. His expression hardened. He closed the remaining distance between them, his presence overwhelming in the narrow alley. "Do not say that again," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "You are not just anything. You are the woman who gave my mother back her voice. You will work for me. This is not a negotiation." And so, her life changed. One day she was serving overpriced steaks to men who never saw her face, and the next she was being driven in a black sedan with tinted windows to a sprawling estate that overlooked the city. The house was a fortress of stone and glass, beautiful and intimidating. But inside, with Isabella, it was a sanctuary. The elderly woman was warm and funny, her hands telling stories of her girlhood in Sicily, of the handsome, dangerous man she had married, of the son she adored and feared for an equal measure. Clara found herself relaxing in her presence, the genuine bond between them a balm on her lonely soul. She learned that Isabella loved to garden, and they spent hours together among the roses, their hands dirty with soil, their silent conversation flowing freely. Through Isabella, she began to see Enzo differently. She saw the crayon drawings from his childhood taped to the back of a pantry door, the worn leather chair he always sat in when he came to visit his mother, the way his shoulders would lose a fraction of their tension when Isabella would pat his cheek. He was always there in the background. Sometimes he would join them for coffee, watching them converse with that same unnerving intensity. He rarely spoke, but his presence was a constant, heavy weight. He asked about her classes, about her ambitions. He seemed to be cataloging every detail about her, storing it away. The life of a mafia boss was one of constant, simmering threat. Clara saw it in the grim faces of the men who guarded the estate, in the hushed, urgent phone calls Enzo would take in his study. Rocco was a near-constant presence, his eyes always scanning, always watchful. He treated Clara with a gruff, formal respect that slowly warmed as he witnessed her effect on Isabella and, more importantly, on his boss. One afternoon, Rocco stopped her as she was leaving. "Be careful, miss," he said, his voice low. "There's trouble stirring. The Falcone family is getting bold." The name meant nothing to her, but the warning in his eyes was clear. The gilded cage had real bars, and the world outside was full of wolves. What she didn't know was that one of those wolves had once been her tormentor. Julian, fired from his managerial position after his disastrous encounter with Enzo, was stewing in a bitter broth of resentment and humiliation. He found a willing ear in a low-level enforcer for the Falcones, eager to trade information for cash. He told them about the quiet waitress who had captured Enzo Bellini's undivided attention. "He's never been like this about a woman," Julian had sneered, pocketing the blood money. "She's with his mother all the time. He's soft on her. She's his weakness." It was a Tuesday evening when the world shattered. Enzo had insisted on driving her home himself, a rare and unsettling departure from their routine. Usually, a silent driver took her back to her tiny apartment, but tonight, he had dismissed the man. "I will see you home," was all he had said. The air inside the armored sedan was thick with unspoken things. He drove with an easy, one-handed confidence, the city lights sliding across the chiseled planes of his face. For a moment, a dangerous, fragile moment, Clara felt a sense of peace. In the quiet darkness of the car, with him beside her, she felt safe. The feeling was an illusion. The attack was brutally efficient. A black van swerved in front of them, cutting them off, while another sedan slammed into their rear bumper, the screech of tortured metal echoing in the narrow street. Doors flew open and men in dark clothing and ski masks spilled out, assault rifles glinting under the streetlights. The world erupted in a cacophony of gunfire. The reinforced glass of the windows spiderwebbed but held. Enzo moved faster than she could have imagined. In one fluid motion, he unbuckled her seatbelt and shoved her down, covering her small frame with his own large body. "Stay down," he roared over the deafening explosions of gunfire. Rocco, in the passenger seat, was already returning fire, his movements economical and deadly. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and fear. Clara could feel the thud of bullets impacting the car's frame, the vibrations rattling through her bones. Enzo was a solid, living shield above her, his warmth a stark contrast to the cold terror gripping her heart. He was a creature of this violence, moving with a lethal grace she had only ever glimpsed. But they were pinned, outnumbered. She heard Rocco curse as one of their two tailing cars was disabled, the guards inside no longer returning fire. Through a crack in the fractured windshield, she saw one of the attackers break from the firefight, moving low and fast toward their vehicle. He wasn't holding a rifle. He was holding a small, dark object with a blinking red light. Her blood ran cold. He was planting a bomb. Panic clawed at her throat, hot and sharp, but something else rose to meet it. A strange, icy calm. Her mind, usually a swirl of anxiety, became a place of sharp angles and clear thoughts. This was a problem to be solved. Screaming would not solve it. The men were focused on the immediate threat, the guns pointed at them. They didn't see the secondary danger, the one that would finish them all. But Clara saw it. And she remembered something else. A story Isabella had told her just last week, her hands painting a picture of the city as it used to be. She talked about Enzo's father, a man who had built his empire from these very streets. He knew this city's secrets. Isabella had signed, a fond smile on her face. Tunnels, hidden passages. There is an old smuggler's drain not far from here. He used to say it could get you from the industrial district to the waterfront, right under their noses. She had described the entrance, a rusted iron plate in an alley behind an old, defunct bakery. An alley that was less than 20 feet from where their car was now trapped. The noise was too loud for her voice to carry. She grabbed Enzo's arm, her fingers digging into the hard muscle. When he glanced down, his face grim, she met his eyes and her hands flew. She had never signed so fast to her life. One hand pointed urgently toward the man planting the device. Bomb. She signed, her movements sharp and desperate. Then she pointed toward the dark, narrow alley to their left. Tunnel.
Old. Go. Now.
She was asking him to trust a ghost story from an old woman over his own battle-honed instincts. She was asking him to abandon the fortress of his car and run into the unknown. For a heart-stopping second, he stared at her, his whiskey-colored eyes searching hers in the strobing chaos of muzzle flashes. He saw no panic. He saw certainty. He saw the fierce intelligence he was only just beginning to comprehend. He made his choice. Rocco. The alley.
Now.
Enzo's voice was a whip-crack of command. He shoved the car door open, using it as a shield as he pulled Clara out with him. Rocco laid down a volley of suppressing fire, forcing the attackers to take cover. They moved, a desperate, stumbling run for the mouth of the alley. The air was filled with the whine of ricocheting bullets. Clara's lungs burned, her legs pumping, her hand held in Enzo's iron grip. He was half-dragging her, his body a constant shield between her and the gunfire. They reached the alley, the darkness swallowing them. Rocco was right behind them, pulling his own wounded driver, who was bleeding from a shot to the shoulder. Here, Clara gasped, pointing at a large, rusted manhole cover half-hidden by overflowing dumpsters. It looked like it hadn't been moved in 50 years. Rocco and Enzo put their shoulders to it, muscles straining. Metal groaned against rusted metal. It gave way with a deafening screech just as a colossal roar erupted from the street behind them. A wave of heat and force slammed into their backs, throwing them forward into the black, gaping hole. The car bomb had detonated. They tumbled into the darkness, landing hard on the damp, moss-covered floor of the tunnel below. The manhole cover slammed shut above them, plunging them into absolute blackness and a sudden, ringing silence. For a moment, no one moved. The only sounds were their own ragged breaths and the slow drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Enzo clicked on the flashlight of his phone, the narrow beam cutting through the pitch black. It illuminated Clara's face, smudged with dirt, her eyes wide. She had not screamed once. She had not frozen. Her quick mind, her attention to the stories of an old woman, had saved them. He looked at her, really looked at her, and the raw, possessive obsession he felt for her was tempered by a new, powerful emotion, absolute, unadulterated awe. He had surrounded himself with killers and soldiers his entire life, but it was the quiet waitress who had seen the path to survival. The journey through the tunnel was a tense, silent trek through the city's forgotten veins. When they finally emerged into the cool night air miles away, near the waterfront, another of Enzo's cars was already waiting, summoned by a single, coded text from Rocco. They drove back to the estate in silence, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving a heavy exhaustion in its wake. But Enzo was not tired. He was energized by a cold, clarifying rage. By the time they walked through the grand doors of his home, he had already made 2 calls. The first was to his most trusted men, issuing orders for retribution. The second was to find out who had talked. It did not take long. The underworld had its own ways of shaking information loose. By dawn, a terrified, disheveled Julian was kneeling on an expensive Persian rug in Enzo's study. He blubbered, he pleaded, he tried to lie. Enzo listened with chilling patience, circling him slowly. "You told them she was my weakness," Enzo said, his voice deceptively soft. He stopped in front of Julian, crouching down to look the pathetic man in the eye. "You have no idea how wrong you were." He glanced toward the doorway, where Clara stood watching, pale but resolute. "That girl, the one you dismissed and humiliated, the one you thought was nothing, she is the only reason I am alive to have this conversation. Her mind is sharper than any blade I own. Her courage is greater than that of any man on my payroll. You thought she was my weakness. You fool. She is my goddamn fortress." He stood up, turning his back on Julian. "Rocco," he said calmly, "take care of this. Make sure the Falcons know who sent him, and make sure they understand this is only the beginning." Rocco nodded grimly and hauled the weeping man from the room. The door clicked shut, leaving Clara and Enzo alone in the suddenly vast, quiet study. He walked to her, his movements slow, deliberate. He gently took her hand, turning it over to examine a small, shallow cut on her palm from a piece of shattered glass. He lowered his head and pressed his lips to the wound, a gesture of such reverent tenderness it made her knees weak. "This is my fault," he murmured against her skin. "I brought this danger to your door." He looked up, his eyes burning with a fierce, protective fire. "It will not happen again. You're not safe out there anymore. You will stay here. With me." It was not a question. It was a declaration. "You belong with me now, Clara," he whispered, his thumb stroking her cheek.
Tesoro mio.
"My treasure. I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone harm you again." She should have been terrified. She should have felt like a prisoner, her life irrevocably hijacked by this dangerous, possessive man. But as she looked into his eyes, she felt none of that. She felt anchored. For the first time since her brother had died, she felt the solid ground of being truly valued, of being seen for everything she was. His possessiveness was not a cage. It was a shield. His world was violent, but his devotion to her was absolute. In the weeks that followed, the city trembled. The Falcone family was dismantled piece by piece with a ruthless precision that left the entire underworld in shock. But within the walls of the estate, a quiet life took shape. Clara continued her studies online, with Enzo paying for everything without a second thought. She spent her days with Isabella, their bond deepening into that of a true family. But her nights belonged to Enzo. He would come to her, shed the armor of the ruthless Mafia boss, and simply be a man who had found the unshakable center of his world. He learned the shape of her hands, not just for the language they spoke, but for the way they felt in his. He worshipped her intelligence, her quiet strength, her unwavering nerve. The shy, invisible waitress was gone, and in her place stood a woman who knew her own power. She was the queen in this stone castle, and the most feared man in the city was utterly, completely, and irrevocably hers. One evening, as she and Isabella sat in the garden watching the sunset, the old woman reached out and took her hand. "He has found his heart again," Isabella signed, her eyes soft and full of love. "He lost it when his father died. You gave it back to him later." Enzo found Clara there, standing under the violet sky. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. He said nothing, simply holding her, his chin resting on her head. She was no longer just the girl who had given his mother back her voice. She was the woman who had given him back his soul. In a world of darkness, she was his only light, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure it never flickered. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Clara's story shows us that true strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about the quiet courage to be seen for who you are. Her intelligence and heart became her greatest weapons, proving that the most underestimated person can change everything. If you are captivated by Clara's rise and Enzo's fierce devotion, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We'd love to hear what you think, so please leave a comment below. Who is your favorite character, and what was your favorite moment? Your engagement helps us bring more tales of empowerment, passion, and thrilling romance to you. We have many more stories to tell, filled with heroines discovering their power and the dangerous men who will do anything to protect them. Until next time, stay strong and keep shining.